Alrighty. So good morning, everybody. My name is Tatiana Calderon. I just want to make a few short announcements before we begin our introductions today and our presentation on the specialized programs for accessibility and ACES. So firstly, I just want to say this presentation is being broadcasted on Facebook Live. We will have a short Q&A at the end of the presentation. Where you will be able to ask your questions. I just want everybody to be aware, if you're watching on Zoom or on Facebook, that this is a public forum. So we please ask that you keep private information private. We don't want to be sharing our children's names out to the world or what school they attend to, just for the sake of privacy and security. I will say everybody who is currently joining this presentation will receive a copy of today's slides and a follow-up email, and you'll be able to access the presentation to review it again on YouTube in a few days. There will also be a short poll at the end for those joining us on Zoom, so we'd really appreciate it if you could just stick around after the presentation to fill that out. And let's get started. So as I mentioned, my name is Tatiana Calderon. I'm the Autism Initiative Coordinator here at Synergia's Metropolitan Parent Center. A few words about Synergia's Metropolitan Parent Center and Autism Initiative. The Autism Initiative project is funded by a grant from the New York City Council under its Autism Initiative. This project supplements the work of Synergia's Metropolitan Parent Center by bringing increased awareness to New York City residents, particularly to communities with large Spanish-speaking populations, about the growing population of children diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. Its strong outreach component targets families of children with a suspected or known diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder or not receiving appropriate educational, health, and other related services. The initiative will link them to other services and supports that meet the individual needs of children and their families. So I want to thank you all for being here today. We're absolutely thrilled that you can join us this morning during this very busy holiday season. And before we get into it, just a brief introduction on our presenters. Today we have Susan Keok, who is the Director of Accessibility of the Specialized Programs in the New York City Public Schools, as well as Andrea Clark-Wheeler, who is the Director of the ACES program. So I will hand it over to them to get started on today's wonderful presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tatiana, and good morning to everyone. Good morning, everyone. My name is Susan Keok. Let's try this again. Good morning, I'm Susan Keok. Thank you for the introduction, Tatiana. So we're going to go ahead and get started. As Tatiana said, I'm the Director of Access and Accessibility for the Special Education Office with New York City Public Schools. And later on, I will get into more detail on what exactly that entails, but I do support students with physical disabilities in a variety of ways across the city. So special education in New York City Public Schools includes services, programs, and specially designed instruction for students to meet their individual needs. So the individual needs of students with disabilities. While most students with IEPs do attend their zoned or district school, New York City Public Schools has made tremendous effort to develop high quality and specialized programs. So the programs that are under our Office of Specialized Programs include ASD programs, which are ASD Nest Horizon and AIMS, accessibility supports, the Academic Career and Essential Skills Program, ACES, the PATH program for students with intensive social, emotional, and behavioral needs, BSE for bilingual special education, and the iRead program, which is intensive reading, education development, and literacy programs. This is specialized programs at a glance. It gives you an idea of the number of schools across New York City public school system that have these programs. So accessibility is not on this chart, but ACES specifically, there are 52 schools across the city that house an ACES program, and ACES serves students in grades K through 12.
So you may be wondering what makes specialized programs different from a student with just an IEP. So specialized programs are not in every school across New York City public schools. They are not, we don't expect them to be in every school because the majority of our students with disabilities are served in their community schools. And that includes students with intellectual disabilities, students with physical disabilities, students who are English language learners who also have disabilities. But we do recognize that there are students who benefit from highly specialized instruction in order to reach their full potential. And from that realization is where the specialized programs come in. And, if you have been attending the other presentations from the specialized programs teams here at Synergia, you will have learned about the bilingual special education programs, the autism spectrum disorder programs, and today we'll be learning about ACES as well. And so, those programs are research-based. They are the result of collaborations among specialized professionals to come up with the best ways to support these students so they can reach their maximum potential. And that means that those programs are also application based. And Andrea will get into what that looks like for a student who's applying for the ACES program. And so, the big takeaway for this is that or one of the takeaways, it's not the biggest takeaway, but one takeaway is that specialized programs, like I said, are not in every school. So one consideration is that if your student does attend a specialized program, it may be a little further away from your home, but those students do also qualify for busing.
So here are some specialized program structures: training and professional development, collaborative practices, homeschool connection, and reduced class size. So specialized programs emphasizes the collaborative and inclusive structures to support students in their learning process. And what we do offer is training and ongoing professional development for not just the teachers, but also related service professionals that work with the students. That's done to incorporate best practices across the school and throughout all classrooms to benefit students with special needs. The collaborative practices, making commitments for teacher teams and related services and providers in the building, they meet regularly to ensure that the supports are implemented with fidelity and consistency. Consistent communication with the students' family and caregivers are there to establish a relationship as well. And then reduced class size, of course, allows for students to have more individualized support.
Okay, now we're going to dive into the accessibility support section of today's presentation. So just briefly, I wanted to share an agenda. So I will talk about what an accessibility need is in terms of admissions in particular, and what an accessible school is when for the New York City public schools, and accessibility needs and admissions. Some tips for transitioning to new school, and then some special considerations for different types of physical disabilities. So there we go. When we talk about a physical accessibility need in New York City public schools, we are talking about a physical condition that makes it impossible or very difficult to stand, walk, and or use stairs. So students with physical disabilities include students who use wheelchairs, walkers, or other mobility aids, and that could be full-time or part-time. That also includes students who may need extra time or assistance on the stairs. And it also includes students who have serious health conditions, or what we call invisible disabilities that necessitate them needing access to an elevator, possibly needing a paraprofessional to carry their backpacks, their books, that sort of thing. And, and that's something that is, something we call like an invisible disability. So, you might look at a student with diminished lung capacity, for example, and, they look like a typical teenager. But in reality, they do need support in order to maximize their school experience. Uh, they need to maintain their energy for their academics and, of course, their social life. So, as the adults in their lives, it's really up to us to help lead them in advocating and helping them accept the help that they do need to maximize their school years and um, and learn that it's okay to accept that help. So when we talk about accessible schools, again, this is, I want to share with you the definitions that we use in New York City public schools, because this is particularly important when we get to admissions. So the New York City public schools rates school buildings into three different categories: fully accessible schools, partially accessible schools, and schools with no accessibility. So a fully accessible school is one in which all areas are accessible to students and adults who use wheelchairs, other mobility devices, and they can participate fully in all areas of the building. We do have a scale, and I'll get into that later, but that would be a 9 or a 10 out of 10. A 10 out of 10 means that the building was built post 1992, or the Americans with Disabilities Act, or there was significant renovations. A 9 means that all areas of the building are accessible, but it is pre-1992, so it may not meet the exact requirements of, say, a 38-inch doorway, things like that. A partially accessible building is on a spectrum from 1 to 8, with 8 having the highest level of accessibility features and 1 having the lowest. When you get to under a 5 and above, you're going to have an elevator. And so many partially accessible schools are great options for our students with physical disabilities. So, I do recommend that families look into those schools. And the New York City Public Schools Space Management has an Office of Accessibility Planning that is continually evaluating all of our 1,600 schools, excuse me, with a rubric and creating what is called building accessibility profiles. And these building accessibility profiles give you the accessibility features of any fully accessible or partially accessible school, starting with the MTA accessible buses or subways to get to the school, the entrance, the accessible entrances, the bathrooms, the classrooms, everything. And you can find these building accessibility profiles or BAPs, which are available to the public by using the school finder or by going to the building accessibility page on the New York City Public Schools website. And you can download a spreadsheet and then you can sort and filter, but we'll get into that a little bit later. And I did want to share some good news. In the past 4 years, we've received with some of the COVID spending money, we did receive over $1 billion for the 2020 through the 2024 capital building plan. And you may know that we have 32 school districts, and then we have 3 citywide school districts. And our goal was to bring more equity across all those districts in terms of fully accessible and partially accessible buildings. So as of now, in 2024, we will have gone from fully accessible buildings from 5% to 30%. Our non-accessible buildings will have dropped from 60% to 40%. And by the end of 2024, 40% of our buildings will be fully accessible and 27% of our buildings will be partially accessible. And we are still finalizing our 24, 25 to 29 capital plan, but we're continuing to move in that positive direction, which just means there's going to be more and more options for our students who require accessible buildings. And now I'd like to talk about enrollment for students with physical accessibility needs. I think we all know that admissions can be an overwhelming time for families, and that is no less true for our students who require an accessible school. And in the 2018-2019 admissions cycle, we introduced the accessible admissions policy. And that was to recognize the fact that students who require an accessible school have fewer options than their peers who do not require an accessible school. So it does mean different. It looks different at the different matriculation points, which are kindergarten, 6th grade, and 9th grade. But generally, what the accessible admissions policy does is for students who have a permanent and documented physical accessibility need, they rise to the top of the priority group they are in for any fully or partially accessible building that they put on their list when they're applying for schools. You can, on the New York City Public Schools website, you can look for the accessible admissions policy, which will give you more information. And, excuse me again. And that is also something that I do. You will get my contact information when you receive the PowerPoint presentation. Please feel free to reach out to me. Please tell your friends to reach out to me. I love helping families with the admissions process. It really can be overwhelming. So, like I said, please do reach out. I always recommend that families start the spring like 18 months beforehand. So, if you have a student who's in 7th grade, I would start spring of 7th grade if the high school process. And yeah, this email, the accessible admissions at schools.nyc.gov, that's also my inbox too. So you'll have that inbox, and then my email is on here as well. And so once the students receive an offer, there are also things we can do to ensure a smooth transition. So, once your child, your student receives an offer, um, it is always good to work with your student's current school and reach out to your new school and say, hey, would you like to come observe my student in their current environment, meet their teachers, learn the best practices, meet the student, like in their environment where they're comfortable and successful. That always makes a big difference in the comfort level of the student, of a lot of our parents. And then if your student has an IEP, invite the new school to attend the IEP meeting in the spring to make sure everything is set up for success for September. If your student has a 504 plan, same thing. Invite the new school to take part in updating that 504 plan in the spring. And yeah, we already talked about that, inviting the current school and the new school to just have conversations. Even if you can't make a visit happen, set up a Zoom. And this is, something else. If you're not comfortable doing that, please reach out to me and I'm happy to facilitate and make those introductions. And some things to look for in the community, in any school community. We talk about school-wide expectations and inclusive language. Uh, for many years, we talked about people first language. So, instead of saying, we hear things still to this day like, oh, the disabled. It's more appropriate to say, a person who uses a wheelchair. And it's not a person who's confined to a wheelchair. The wheelchair is someone's freedom. That they would not be able to do what they can do if they didn't have that tool. Um, and but I do want to point out in recent years that this kind of come full circle for some communities. For example, people with autism often prefer to be referred to as autistic people. Same with the deaf community. They, prefer to be called deaf. So if you're in doubt, just ask. People generally are not offended. They appreciate the fact you are taking, respecting them and asking them what their preference is. Age appropriate verbal and body language. We see this a lot with students with multiple disabilities. So with, physical disabilities, students who don't speak, who use communication devices. We might see folks talking to a teenager like in a baby voice that, they're still 15 or 16, 17 years old. Speak to them like they are a 17-year-old because, they know what you're doing and, have that respect for them. And another thing is inclusive events. I like to talk about using an inclusive lens when you're planning activities. If you're planning a field trip, you want to make sure everyone can participate. I cannot tell you how many times I get a frantic call. Oh, we have this field trip planned and it's not accessible. Think these things through. Have a student committee. There's a lot of ways to get ahead of this. I'm happy to help brainstorm. Um, and then the accessibility contingency plan. Oh, I'm sorry, I did not. I'm sorry, you guys. There's the slide I just talked about. I did want to bring this up, the accessibility contingency plan. This is also something that I worked on with space management because I think it puts a lot of families at rest. So what this is for, when you're in a building with an elevator, it's always possible the elevator might go down. So we have developed this accessibility contingency plan, or ACP, that when that every school designates a room on the accessible floor that in the event of a long-term elevator or escalator malfunction, that room will be used as the student's classroom who has an accessibility need. And their least restrictive environment includes their teacher, their classmates, and their class materials. And the custodian engineer can help bring down those materials, but it is an actual plan that we can send to schools, and we are doing trainings on this. So again, if something were to happen at your child's school and you don't feel that they're providing your student with their classmates and their teacher in an accessible room, please reach out. And we can work on supporting the school and providing an accessibility contingency plan. So I just want to briefly touch on some special considerations for different student populations. So we did talk about transitioning to new schools. One activity I love to do is kind of a dry run when you're going to a new school to identify possible barriers. Like I know when I was in AP, we used to keep a big 50-gallon trash can in the doorway. Well, if you have a student, which we did, in a big power chair with a ventilator, like, I mean, he would mow that thing over and send it flying, like we needed to find a new place for that. So kind of, if you do that with your groups of students, it really opens their eyes too and makes them more aware of people with disabilities around them. Make sure even when the bathrooms are accessible, you have to make sure it's accessible for your child. And, we might have to make some minor reasonable accommodations. Definitely, try to make a visit. Again, reach out to me. I can help facilitate that. Same thing with durable medical equipment or any sort of adaptive equipment standards. We can help transport them. Make sure that they have a safe place to be. These are all things that we want to get done in the spring before the first day of school. And I also want to talk about assistive technology and instructional technology. Briefly, if you walk in a classroom and everyone's doing a writing assignment and there's one student using a laptop with word prediction software, that's assistive technology. Assistive technology is technology designed specifically to help people with disabilities. You walk into another classroom, everyone is using a laptop with word prediction software. That's instructional technology. It's available to everyone in the classroom, whether or not they have a disability. So if your student does have assistive technology and they are transitioning to a new school, you want to make sure that assistive technology is going with them. If it's a communication device, if it needs to be charged, does it stay at school? Does it go back and forth? Just have these conversations so everything's ready to go on the first day of school. And special considerations for students who have sensory needs or autism spectrum disorders. These are things that we use in schools, but they can also really help parents at home. Supporting communication. Many students, if not all students with ASD, have speech language therapy. So the speech helps students address their delays in communication and pragmatics. And, know that many students with autism are very direct communicators. Stay away from sarcasm. Say what you mean what you say, and know that kids with autism often do the same. Don't take offense. And again, if they use AAC or augmentative communication devices, ask for training on how to use those. Establish routines and schedules. That can also work at home, depending on your child. Could be words, could be pictures, it could be photos, it could be drawings, but help keep that routine. Have your student be active in, removing or crossing off what's going on when they get like a preferred activity. Those are just things that help them have control of their environment. And also social stories. So, if there's something coming up that might make your student nervous, you can write out all of the steps that are going to happen. Or if there's something that they're afraid of, you can write out, why they ways that they can different ways that there'll be support for them to get through that. And they can read it as much as they need to until they feel comfortable. And we already talked about communication. So, special considerations for students who are blind or have low vision. There are different types of visual accessibility needs. We have students with low vision or blindness, students with albinism or photophobia, which is sensitivity to light, or students with cortical visual impairment, which is damage to the cortical nerve. So depending on the level, different people can see different shadows, and it depends on the student. But if if your student does need support and you do not have that on their IEP, you can reach out to the email on the screen, and you will be getting this PowerPoint, info@edvisionservices.org, to start to get an evaluation and to get support. What's that? Oops, wrong slide. Sorry again. And then this is for students who are deaf or hard of hearing. You want to work with the student and their family to see where the best seating is for them. And on the building accessibility profiles that I talked about earlier, it also does that they do indicate if there are flashing lights for emergencies. So you want to make sure that students who are deaf or hard of hearing know what those lights mean and know what to do. So you want to practice that. And again, if you do need support, if you feel that your student needs more services or different services, or an evaluation, there is contact information where you can reach out to hearing services. And that is all for me. Thank you very much.
Okay. Hello again, everyone. My name is Andrea Clark-Wheeler, and I am the director of the Academic Career and Essential Skills Program, ACES. So I am going to cover just some information on what the ACES program is, where you'll find the programs across New York City Public Schools District 1 through 32. I'll provide information on the student criteria and the student profile. We'll go over the application process in detail, and then I'll give you an idea as to the instructional environment and the programming that happens for ACES students citywide. Don't want to keep turning my back. So the ACES programs were designed to provide an appropriately rigorous academic education for eligible students with an intellectual disability who participate in New York State alternate assessment. ACES programs are offered citywide across districts 1 through 32, and it does serve currently students between kindergarten and grade 12. ACES programs provide inclusive practices, offering meaningful opportunities for inclusion for all students, ensuring their access to students without IEPs throughout the school day. There is also a focus on adaptive skill development, essential living skills, and providing work readiness or helping them to develop, work readiness skills. So as I mentioned, or you saw on a previous slide, there are 52 ACES programs across the city. So that covers all 5 of our boroughs. You can see there is a high concentration of programs. Queens, Staten Island has the smallest at 5. And again, there are elementary, middle, and high schools in each borough. So here's the ACES student profile. I think I'll just do it from here. So as I mentioned, the students in the ACES program would have a classification of intellectual disability. Students with multiple disabilities are also eligible for ACES programs. We'll talk about what both distinctions or what both educational classifications means on a later slide. So in terms of their cognitive performance or intelligence, students would have mild to moderate intellectual disability as their primary or concomitant impairment. So concomitant impairment really being a student could have intellectual disability as well as autism, or intellectual disability as well as an orthopedic impairment. We don't consider blind and deaf along with intellectual disability to be considered a multiple disability. So the assessment criteria, all the students in the ACES program do follow New York State alternate assessment. That is a requirement for placement in the program, and we'll talk about what NYSA or New York State alternate assessment means later on. In terms of their academic performance or achievement levels, their abilities are expected to be lower or significantly below grade level expectations, and they might struggle with working independently or working in groups. Students might use assistive technology devices to support communication or learning and interaction. We have noticed that through the pandemic, due to learning loss with remote and so on, that the students could typically between 4 to 6 year delay. And then the last piece of the profile is adaptive behavior. So some students may have significant behavioral challenges, but they are not aggressive or self-injurious. Next. Okay, so what is intellectual disability? So according to our special education operating procedures, procedural manual, thank you. An intellectual disability is characterized by a significantly sub-average general intellectual functioning in reasoning, learning, problem solving, and it exists concurrently with deficits in adaptive behavior manifested during a developmental period and adversely affects educational performance. That's a lot of words, right? So when you think of ID at home as a parent, what you're thinking of or what you'd be looking for is your child having a delayed reading speed or delayed reading development, maybe difficulties in reasoning or logic. They might struggle with critical thinking and judgment. There might be troubles problem solving or planning their steps, planning ahead, and possibly highly distractible. In terms of adaptive behaviors, that might be evidenced in your child learning toileting or self-care routines at a slower pace than what you'd find to be typical, or having slower social development. Okay, they might need support with managing, healthcare items. They might socially have concerns with appropriate boundaries, things of that nature. So the multiple disabilities classification denotes a severe intellectual disability in addition to another significant area. So as I mentioned before, having intellectual disability and orthopedic impairment or emotional disturbance, having one or more of those disabilities, so intellectual disability with another classification together, your child could have an educational classification of multiple disabilities. And just a note here, at the end of September, New York City Public Schools enrollment was about 190,000. Only 2.5 of those students, which is about 4,500, only 2.5 students across New York City Public Schools meet the criteria for intellectual disability. It's even lower for multiple disabilities. It came in at about 1.4 students. So the ACES program is doing phenomenal work to support students with really complex needs, right, that aren't highly prevalent. Okay, so I'm just gonna shift a little bit. So New York State Alternate Assessment is part of the New York State testing program that measures the attainment of the state's learning standards in areas of English language arts, mathematics, science, for students with the most severe cognitive disabilities. So for NYSA, there is a determination checklist around your student or your child participating in New York, I apologize, participating in New York State Alternate Assessment. It's not just having a cognitive disability or severe cognitive needs. It is also it would also mean that they would require especially highly designed special instruction to support their needs. They might have limitations around adaptive behavior as well. If your student, your child is in the process of alternate assessment being considered, you want to make sure that your school is providing you with a checklist to make sure that you agree that your child, their abilities are appropriate and aligned to New York State alternate assessment. The assessment does happen every year, similar to New York State's regular assessments to standardized students. The questions are, they are modified and adapted to meet the expectations. The wording is different. It's delivered in a computer-based model as well. It happens every year for grades 3 through 8, and then it happens again once when the student is in high school before exiting. Great. So part of New York State alternate assessment is the skills and achievement commencement credential. And currently it is the only exiting credential available to students with severe cognitive disabilities. So if your child is exiting New York City public schools, having participated in New York State alternate assessment, they are not working towards achieving a high school diploma, right? The skills and achievement commencement credential, it's a non-diploma certificate that recognizes students' skills and achievements in academics, career development, and other foundations needed for post-school living, learning, and working. Okay. The ACES application process. I'm not going to go through in detail all of the steps, but I do really want to highlight for families that the ACES Family Guide gives in detail, will provide you with an idea as to the instructional environment that ACES programs offer, and also will give you information on the student profile. It is offered in the 10 most prevalent languages, New York City Public Schools. Well, I think when you go to, you can find it by going on to schools.nyc.gov. You type in ACES, you will find a list of all the specialized programs, but the Family Guide is available to you. We recommend that families review it as well as school teams before considering programs like ACES, just because the student profile is very specific in the component of ID or multiple disabilities and participating in New York State alternate assessment. So after reviewing the profile, often we get applications from school teams like school psychologist, a family worker, a guidance counselor, but we also do get direct applications from families. We want to make sure that if the application is coming from a member of the IEP team, that the parent is also consenting to this process, as it is lengthy. So you want to consider, in considering whether or not to apply to ACES, you want to have a conversation with your child's teacher or the IEP team on their present levels of performance, right? What are they able to do? Are they making expected progress in whatever setting they're currently in? You also want to talk about the student's level of independence with activities such as daily living, dressing, grooming. So remember when we talked about intellectual disability and that adaptive behavior component being part of it, we want to get an idea. You as the parent want to have a full idea as to what your child's significant needs are and whether they are being addressed in the current setting or if you need a specialized program such as ACES to support their needs. Okay, sorry, just went back. And then, so the ACES application is going to go directly to ACES programs.schools.nyc.gov. That is the ACES programs inbox. Once the application lands there, you'll get a confirmation that the email was received. And once the team starts working on it, an email goes out to say, we're in the process, we're working with your application. Applications can be submitted at any point in time. Let's say it's the middle of the school year, you just left your child's IEP meeting, and the team is saying to you, you know what, your child does have intellectual disability, your child does participate in New York State alternate assessment, and your child needs some support with adaptive living skills, maybe working on vocational skills is most appropriate for your child at this time. It doesn't matter the day, it doesn't matter the time of the year, put the application in. We offer placements for the current school year up until about February, but applications are reviewed all throughout the year. So the process continues, the team's review. So as I mentioned, the application goes into the inbox. Once the central ACES team starts working on the application, an email is sent out to the team that requested. It's also, I should note, it's also very important to provide your team with your email address if you're applying, if the school is applying on your behalf, so that you are part of that continuous conversation throughout the application review. We start looking at so typically when parents are applying, they might not complete the whole application, which is fine, as long as we have your child's full name, date of birth, and their school ID number. We're able to access the special education student information system to retrieve any assessments that were conducted on your child's behalf from the time that they began with their special education referral. We will go through all of that information, and we weigh things differently. So we look at a cognitive assessment, we'll look at their academic measure, their IEPs and IEPs going back, as I mentioned, from the time that they were referred to special education, and then we'll look at adaptive behavior skills. Step 4 is the eligibility determination and notification. So once we've gone through all of that information, sometimes we'll go back to the team to ask questions, right? Like if something has changed, if your child has just gotten a communication device, let's say, for example, or just received the support of a one-to-one paraprofessional, we'll go back to the team and say, okay, the student has had this service or this support for 3 months. How has the child's present levels of performance changed? How have the needs changed, to make sure that we are making the right determination for your child and the right offer? Sometimes that conversation isn't necessary. We get a really good picture of who the student is and what they're able to do in conversations with families as well. And we might say, okay, you know, John is eligible. The next step is for us to work on finding a placement for your child. So the placement process involves us. So after we say, it could happen 2 ways. Over the phone, we might call and say, your child is eligible for ACES programs. We're going to look for a seat for you. If there has been ongoing conversation between the team, the parent, and the central ACES team, we might actually just go ahead and look for the closest available program. And I'm stressing closest, as mentioned, because there are only 52 programs across the city. I'm pretty sure any one of us could walk outside and walk 10 blocks and pass a school. That it's not typical that that school that's closest in your neighborhood is going to provide an ACES program. So we will look at all of the available programs that have an available seat that's closest, and we will make an offer for the closest program first. So in the majority of the boroughs, it's very close. In some boroughs, it could be very far. But as Susan mentioned earlier, all students that have IEPs are eligible for specialized transportation will receive busing. And if you are typically bringing your child to school every day, we'll work with the IEP team to make sure that busing gets added to the IEP prior to moving to the ACES program, so that when you enroll in the program, the school can request a bus from your home to the ACES program and back home. So the other piece on that page is just the school location letter. So once you receive information, once you receive notification that your child is eligible and this is where the seat is. We also facilitate you taking a tour. Taking a tour is recommended. I do know that, especially if you've been waiting for an ACES program or waiting to find a program that will support your child in the way that you desire, there is a movement to say, oh, I want it, I got it, I'm taking it. I'll stress it's very important for yourself, knowing your student, knowing your child in a different way than they might present at school, to go and meet with the school leaders, go and see the ACES classroom and get an idea and ask as many questions as you can of the specific ACES program. We get a lot of phone calls asking about schools, and I have seen the majority of ACES programs, but I'm not there on a day-to-day basis, right? So it's important to take the time to visit the program, and if possible, take your child along with you so that you can see, the energy, your children, when they like something, when they don't like something, so that you're making the best decision around placement. So here are some takeaways. This is the ACES program inbox. That's where all the applications and communication goes. Before submitting the application, you want to make sure that you're taking a look at the family guide, as I mentioned prior. And then this is the assessment piece. This is important to note. As I mentioned, families can apply on their child's behalf and just provide minimal information, right? We need to know who you are, who the child is, and we can figure out the rest. But it's important to work with your school's IEP team to make sure that there is a psychoeducational evaluation that happens within the last 3 years, naturally. But we want to make sure that there is a comprehensive cognitive assessment, that there is a measure of their academic performance, and then there is also an assessment done to identify where they are in terms of their adaptive behaviors. That is typical for kids first grade through 12th. For kindergarten, we ask for assessments to be within 12 months, but it's important that we have that, if you have that conversation with the school team, or provide us with the right contact person to reach out to your child's school to say, hey, these are the things that we need to have in order to review this application quickly. And then, of course, talking with your child's school, as I mentioned, is very important. Have that conversation, have that openness with them that you're considering a specialized program so they can help you in making your decision. And then the timeline, again, the timeline from application to offer can vary significantly. As you can imagine, at the beginning of the school year, it's much quieter. Students are just arriving at school. The teachers are getting to know them, reviewing IEPs and such and so forth. When it comes to this time of the year, around the holidays, around the break, when students have settled in and the teachers are able to do some assessments and identify where they are, applications pick up. And then again in the spring, thinking about moving from elementary into middle into high school, the application picks up. So if you think ACES might be appropriate for your child, I cannot stress enough, please do apply as soon as you can. So I want to give you all an idea. These are all images from ACES classrooms across the city. So one of the things you'll notice here on your left, that these are visual schedules. These are probably one of the anchor pieces in ACES classrooms, right? Students with varying abilities, having a visual representation of where they are or what they should be doing is very important. Life skills up to the top left. ACES programs, as I mentioned, part of the curriculum and the content is to give the student information and help them to develop skills that they'll need to engage in the community. The picture in the middle with the boxes is, okay, use the pointer. Oh, thank you. There we go. There we go. So this image right here, I'm sorry, you won't see that on Zoom, but you all will see it in the studio. This picture is a sensory corner to provide sensory support. As I mentioned, students in ACES programs are not just present with intellectual disabilities, but could present with other impairments such as autism. That's pretty typical for a student that is on the spectrum to need some type of sensory support in the classroom. So you'll find these in ACES classrooms as well. As I mentioned, there is a focus on work readiness skills. This particular classroom has classroom jobs that the students apply for. Around the area of life skills, in this particular classroom, the teacher has a board directed to money, monetary awareness and saving money. Thank you. And then here, well, in both of these, this is a classroom activity that the students were doing. This is a life skills class, and they were making pumpkin pie. I thought I had another picture closer to the activity. I think that's on the second slide. And this one here is actually an image taken from one of our high school programs where the work-based learning is they run a kitchen that prepares meals, breakfast and lunch, and sells it to staff. And then, of course, at this point, post-pandemic, all classrooms definitely have multimedia instructional technologies, and that's common. And ACES students, of course, engage in different ways. So students that are able to write and type, they can do that, but differentiated instruction would allow for the student to write on the board. Okay, so the instructional programming. So the three main components of ACES are the academic piece is that all programs provide ELA, math, science, social studies, ELA, math, science, sorry, there's a typo there, and that would be standards aligned instruction. And I just want to add in here as well that the instruction in ACES is given at the student's grade level, right? So if your child is in the 5th grade, they're going to be using 5th grade standards, and the work is going to be modified and adapted to where your child is able to enter and have success on that standard. That's another piece with the New York State alternate assessment as well. It's really giving the access to the students at the grade level that they belong in, and us educators giving the support of shifting the delivery of the lesson to meet the needs of your child. The essential skills piece is daily living skills. And so daily living skills could be a number of different things. It could be teaching self-care, how to dress, sequencing, giving information on hygiene supports. It could be self-advocacy and communication and interactions, and then using community resources. So if you notice down here to the bottom right, this is a class, an ACES classroom, and their teacher took them to the post office, taught lessons around what a letter is, how to write a letter, how do you send a letter, how do you buy stamps, and the students were able to engage in opportunities. So that's really, I think, a really great image of the using community resources. And then the last piece is the work readiness. So helping the students to develop strong work ethic and effective communication and advocacy. So the images at the corners, this student, this class trip was to the library. He's uniquely interested in becoming a librarian and wanted so badly to be to scan the books, which is a beautiful experience for the students to have to get an idea as to the work of a librarian. And then, as I mentioned again, as I mentioned prior, this is the work-based learning program at a Queens high school where the students are preparing the meals for the staff. Here, this is a bank book. The students engage in their learning activities and are able to purchase items at the end of the week. Here's an example of purchasing items. They are taught banking, how to save money, and of course that is numeracy, and that's mathematics there. And then this is just the image of that pie making activity from the previous slide, where I mentioned students. This is another example of that differentiated instruction that's offered to students in the ACES program. This is actually high school, and this child does not yet have the ability to write. They were able to complete this work assignment, sequencing the activity to have the final product, but their participation was around like using picture symbols to show the steps. Okay. So applying to specialized programs, I won't go into detail, but across all, for ACES programs, only students that are currently in ACES programs can apply to ACES programs for middle school and high school. If you currently have a 5th grader, you've already done the middle school application process, or if you currently have an 8th grader, you have already completed your high school application. Do not hesitate to apply to ACES programs. If they are determined to be eligible for ACES, we will offer them an ACES middle school. We will offer them an ACES high school. You'll receive that offer as a waitlist offer through My Schools portal for high school. And for middle schools, we will still offer the same, offer you a tour when you accept that program. You'll then, the offer of that seat is given to you directly. And your child will be added to the roster at the ACES receiving school for middle school. So no, don't worry about that. Those are those pieces. And then I should also say, if a specialized program seat, if an ACES seat is offered and you don't like the program, you don't like the schools that are available, you as a parent, you're your child's biggest advocate. You're more than welcome to say, not this school, not this area, or not this time for my child, right? I don't want anyone to walk away thinking that because you've applied to ACES and your child is eligible, that they must participate in the ACES program. If the seat is available, we will offer it. If the program is not suitable, whether it's distance or what have you, you can always decline ACES placement if that is your choice. Okay. Oh, I have the clicker. So that's it for us. We're able to take some questions, I think.
So we'll be taking some questions now. I do see we have about 4 questions in our Q&A box, so I'll go ahead and read them now for our presenters. All right, so from Miss Karina Garcia, she states, what are the basic differences between ACES and District 75? What are the benefits from moving from a D75 to an ACES program?
Great. That's actually a question that gets asked a lot. So students in District 75 provides intensive supports, right? The ACES program, as I explained, is designed specifically to support students with ID, intellectual disability, or carry multiple disabilities. What's unique about the placement in the ACES program is that ACES classes exist in community schools. So your child is still going to have access to socialization opportunities, inclusive opportunities, and engagement with students that do not have IEPs. In District 75 programs, students are grouped according to their grade level, and the classroom could incorporate students with a number of needs, right? A number of disability classifications. So it could be a severe cognitive delay. It could be an orthopedic impairment. It could be a child that has complex needs around like nursing or self-care. I like to tell families that it's really important to give your child an opportunity to participate in the least restrictive program as possible, right? So you want to still give them an opportunity to learn alongst their peers that might have stronger skills than they do or need a little bit less support. And serving and attending a community school is the best environment for that.
Thank you, Andrea. And we do have a question from Galen Moore, where they state, what are the inclusive aspects of ACES?
Right. So again, programmatically, students in the ACES program, unless your child requires adaptive physical education, they're likely going to go into gym with a community non-special class. And by special class, they might be going to gym, let's say, with students that do not have IEPs. They're at the cafeteria and recess with students that don't have IEPs. Many of our ACES programs are taking school-wide trips. They're engaging in dances, different clubs and elective with students that do not have IEPs. So that's the inclusion piece there.
And we do actually have a question for one of our Facebook viewers. They just want to know, what is the main difference between an ASD program and the ACES program? And they say thanks.
Sure, I get that question a lot as well. So the ASD programs Nest and Horizon support students that are meet the criteria for or have a classification as autism on their IEPs, and those students participate in standardized assessment. So I mentioned alternate assessment is required for the ACES program. Their students that are ultimately assessed have severe cognitive need. That's the stark difference between ASD programs and ACES. I'll say it in another way. ASD programs, the students, because they are participating in standardized assessment, they are on a high school diploma-bound track. Students in ACES that are alternately assessed, different. ACES does support students within autism classification that also have intellectual disability.
Thank you. And we do have a question from Miss Gladys. She says, good morning, everybody, firsthand. For the ACES program, the student needs to be in a District 75 or a public school. How about if a student's in a private school and a parent is considering an ACES program?
Oh, we'll take kids from anywhere. Yeah, the child does not have to be attending New York City public schools, does not have to be in a District 75 program. We get a lot of applications from students that are currently in like daycare settings as well. As long as your child meets the criteria, which is having an intellectual disability and recommended to participate in alternate assessment, you should absolutely apply for an ACES program. But do note that ACES programs exist in New York City public schools, in community schools. They're not in privatized settings.
Thank you. And then we have a question from Ms. Karina Garcia. Her child is currently in ACES, but she states, if ACES is an inclusive program and gives opportunities to socialize with neurotypical students, why is it that I've noticed, I guess specifically in her program, in her school, that when they make trips for the general school, the school separates the ACES students?
Okay, so I would say send an email to the ACES inbox, because I'd like to know your child and your child's school specifically, that we can address that. So again, as I mentioned prior, I'm in all of the buildings. I visit all the buildings, but I'm not there in the day-to-day. So if there's something that's happening that's not aligned to what we've shared and what the expectations are, please make us aware so that we can fix that at the school level.
Thank you, Andrea. Karina, I will definitely make sure to share the information so you can reach out to Andrea directly and speak about that a little more one-on-one. We do have another question. They're asking, the students from ACES, could they have the chance to attend a college program post high school graduation?
So there are colleges that do offer support for students with intellectual disabilities. There are no IEPs in college. So I should have said this as well. So students in ACES, especially as they're approaching those the transition years, like 14 through 21 plus, we want to make sure that the family is set up with the appropriate services. So reaching out to OPWDD, the Office of People with Developmental Disabilities, connecting with a care coordinator, working with other agencies, Synergia, AHRC, Access VR, to make sure, and your school team is very, very critical in this planning stage, to make sure that the assessments are being done and that there is a clear transition plan being worked on to support whatever your post-secondary goals are for your child. So yes, college is accessible to students in the ACES program, to students that are leaving with a SAC credential. If your child is at a transition point right now and you're planning for college for next year, I would encourage you to speak with your school's transition team leader, and also to really stay on top of the IEP process and looking at the post-secondary goals that have been outlined for your child, to make sure that you're communicating what your students' needs are, and the school is outlining with agency support how your child is going to meet those goals.
Thank you.
Sure.
And someone's just asking for clarification. They said the amount of ACES programs in each borough includes middle and high schools, or
Elementary, middle, and high school.
thank you. And then one final question that I see in our chat box is, so parent shares, my student was classified with ID when they were evaluated in pre-K about 7 years ago. The placement assigned from the IEP team at the time was a D75. They said that they had never suggested the ACES program at the time, and they actually did the research and looked up the information and provided everything to the psychologist. So it was more of a comment rather than a question for this parent. But and then I guess will come my question is, when a child is classified from pre-K with ID, transition from pre-K to kindergarten, is ACES a program that the IEP team would suggest, or is this something just based off the individual needs of a student that like a teacher or psychologist could suggest at the school level?
So that is a tough question to answer, insofar as we have given specialized programs the same way that we are presenting to you all in a series. Specialized programs do give a lot of presentations to psychologists, school supervisors of psychologists and psychologists, to make sure that everyone is aware of the availability of these unique programs. I have looked at the kindergarten transition. There is a document, the full name of it is escaping me, but there's a document that you, the child is no longer in pre-K. Okay, in that Turning 5 process, there is a Turning 5 guideline that talks about the different programs as well. I think it's really important, as a parent of students in NYCPS myself, to be aware for myself, for ourselves as parents, of all of the available options to New York City public school students. And I think that a large part of that. So the short answer is yes, a school team, school psychologist could be the one to say, because your child has intellectual disability and will be participating in alternate assessment, you should consider, or we will apply to ACES on your child's behalf. Or if your child has autism, we'll apply to these autism programs. I've become overwhelmingly aware that that doesn't always happen in conversation. So I want to inspire and empower all of you all as parents to have that information, right? To actively browse the New York City Public Schools website, schools.nyc.gov, on available programs, even when it comes to receiving classification, going on to the city's the New York City Schools website to get an idea as to, or understanding as to what the disability classification means and the services that are available to your child to make sure that you're taking advantage of as many opportunities as you can to support your child.
Thank you, Andrea. So, oh, there's one more question. Okay. We have a parent asking, there are kids with autism that could possibly benefit from ACES or be approved for the ACES program?
Absolutely. So autism would be considered a concomitant impairment that could exist with intellectual disability. So there are plenty of students in the ACES program that do meet the criteria for both an autism classification and IB classification. Many of them are classified as multiple disabilities, but there are plenty of students in the program that are classified as autism that do also have intellectual disabilities, and they're supported in the ACES program. Yeah.
Do have a question in person for those viewing on Zoom. One second.
Just real quick. So I know that the ASD program, they need to have the classification on the IP as all ASD. So for ACES, is it the same thing on the IEP? Does it have to be ID or MD in the classification? Because I know, like you said, students that have ASD can benefit from the ASD program because the ACES program, because they have both the intellectual and can have ASD as well. So do they need to have ID on their classification on the IEP?
No. So a student with that has ASD that also presents with an intellectual disability, they can come into the program with an ASD classification. Typically, you see it as multiple disabilities. But yeah, nope, that what we do on our end in the application review is to make sure that the assessments confirms that they do have intellectual disability in addition to whatever other supports or conditions they might have. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I currently don't see any more questions in the chat or Q&A box. This is definitely the time there's one. Okay, so this question is for accessibility. A child with hypotonia receiving PT, does this condition have to be documented in the IEP for the student to receive accessibility, whether that's fully or partial?
It should be documented in the IEP regardless. In my opinion, it should be in the present levels of performance under the physical development. The physical therapist should indicate, what the diagnosis is and how the student is being treated in physical therapy. And so then when the student is getting ready to either apply for middle school or high school, there is a question on the My School's application that says, does your student have, I won't be able to say it verbatim, but it's something, does your student have a permanent disability that requires an accessible school? And as of right now, it's a yes/no question. So this parent would answer yes, and that would automatically trigger the accessible admissions policy. And, you know, and if she would like, or he or she would like to contact me, you know, please feel free to email me and we can, you know, hop on the phone and talk about it more. But yes, so, and I should have actually said that in the presentation. So thank you. I'm going to write that down. So it is on the My Schools application, which is how all enrollment, not enrollment, which is how all admissions are done at the matriculation points, does have the accessibility question. So just to be clear, some students will have an IEP, some students will have a 504, some students will have neither one of those, and they will still qualify for the accessible admissions priority.
Thank you, Susan.
Sure.
So I see that we currently don't have any more questions in the Q&A or chat box. Parent, they'll send the thumbs up for your answer, just to let you know. Oh, well, there's one. There's one more. Okay, this is from Trisha. She states, to be clear, with the ACES program, you not get a high school diploma, and are they taught on the child's academic/performing level if they are delayed?
So I just want to clarify that question a little bit. The ACES program is not the limiting factor for the high school diploma. It's more that students that are exiting New York City public schools that participate in New York State alternate assessment only are able to receive a skills and achievement commencement credential, right? So that is, even if your child is not in an ACES program, if your child is participating in New York State alternate assessment, they will be leaving, at the time that they're leaving New York City public schools, they are leaving with a skills and achievement commencement credential. I'm sorry, what was the last piece of that question? Oh, it was around the academics. Great. So you want to?
Yeah, I can reread it. Yeah, the second half is, are they taught on the child's academic/performing level if they are delayed?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, instruction is delivered at the grade level that your child attends. If your child is in an ACES program at 9th grade, your child is going to be given 9th grade academic content. The teacher will be modifying and adapting the lesson so that your child is able to participate on those skills, right? What you will not see is, you know, like your 5th grade student getting a 2nd grade workbook because they read a 2nd grade level. Like that is not that is not offering your child an appropriately rigorous academic experience, right? So at all grades, your child is getting instruction at the grade standards aligned instruction at the grade level that they are participating in. So a 5th grade class, a 5th grade reading activity is going to have the content of the 5th grade standard. It's going to have the content of a 5th grade reading book. The teacher might present the wording. She might adapt the lesson so that your child is able to engage with it, but it is going to be the content at your child's grade level. Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so I don't see any more in the chat. So I guess this has brought us to the conclusion of our present. Oh, never mind. One sec. So parent asked, in the ACES program, each school will decide what curriculum for ELA and math to be used. How much effort ACES program will make into teaching to a student how to read?
So of course, the science of reading is impacting all of the schools, right? So making sure that we are properly as a system assessing dyslexia, giving supports around fluency development, giving foundational skills around phonics. That's something that's happening system-wide across New York City public schools.
About reading instruction.
Right. So yeah, that's happening across New York City public schools. That's the current initiative around New York City Reads. So ACES programs follows. It's part of New York City public schools. It's given in New York City public school. I believe the first part of the question was around the curriculum. So each individual school, yes, the school leaders are going to decide on the curriculum that best fits their models within their particular schools? The answer, yes, there is reading remediation, reading development support given across the city. ACES students are also receiving similar instruction.
Thank you so much, Andrea. So as I was saying, we have concluded our presentation for today. I want to thank everybody who was viewing through Facebook and asking your questions there, to those joining us on Zoom. For those on Zoom, I do ask you stay just a little bit longer just to fill out a poll for us. We truly appreciate it. And I'll be stopping the